Psalm 39. I said, I will take heed to my ways, that I sin not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle, while the wicked is before me. I was dumb with silence. I held my peace, even from good, and my sorrow was stirred. My heart was hot within me. While I was musing, the fire burned. Then spake I with my tongue. The Lord make me to know mine end, and the measure of my days. What is it, that I may know how frail I am? Behold, thou hast made my days as an handbreadth, and mine age is as nothing before thee. Verily every man at his best state is altogether vanity. Shelah. Surely every man walketh in vain show. Surely they are disquieted in vain. He heapeth up riches, and knoweth not who shall gather them. And now, Lord, what wait I for? My hope is in thee. Deliver me from all my transgressions. Make me not the reproach of the foolish. I was dumb. I opened not my mouth before my mouth, because thou didst it. Remove thy stroke away from me. I am consumed by the blow of thine hand. When thou rebukest dost correct man for iniquity, thou makest his beauty to consume away like a moth. Surely every man is vanity. Shelah. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear unto my cry. Hold not thy peace at my tears, for I am a stranger with thee, and a sojourner, as all my fathers were. O spare me, that I may recover strength before I go hence and be no more. Our husband has a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you that we get to gather together here tonight to hear from your word, to hear from you, Lord. I pray that you would fill our pastor with your spirit, that you would be able to show us something that we haven't seen before from the scriptures. And in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Jason. Psalm 39, to the chief magician, even to Jeduthun, a psalm of David. So this psalm is dedicated to Jeduthun, and it's also a psalm of David. So David wrote it, but he dedicated it to the chief magician. Now, obviously, the chief magician there, a lot of people believe that's dedicated to God as the chief magician, and then, but more specifically, this is dedicated to help the leader of the I guess national choir, or whatever, how we have sometimes, like, you have your Marine band, you have your basically those top-notch bands that play at all the functions and things, the government functions and whatnot. Basically, this is the king's leadership in the temple. Actually, the temple, I believe it is, that he would lead the singing, and he would direct what songs to have and stuff. So it'd be kind of like a Rudy or whatever for the church and stuff. And so he would determine what to do. And so this was kind of given when this guy would even develop his songs and to make songs from the scriptures, that King David wanted to give him instruction on kind of where to focus his songs. Do I focus it on trying to convert the lost, or do I focus it on trying to give wisdom to all people? What do I focus these things on? And so his advice here is to, he's kind of given Jeduthun I'll just call him Jed for now. That's a lot easier for me. Jed, he's telling him, hey, this is what I said. And he's like giving himself the example, kind of how he gives an example for all people that read the Psalms. He's given himself as an example to Jed to be able to do this. And so we'll look kind of who Jeduthun is here. Let's go to Chronicles chapter 16, verse 41. These are just kind of showing where he gets his authority and position from King David, and that would be 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 41. It says, and with them Herman and Jeduthun and the rest that were chosen, who were expressed by name, to give thanks to the Lord, because his mercy endureth forever. So the first thing we notice is that the reason why they needed a leader, and for the song service was to give thanks to the Lord because His mercy endureth forever. So that's the primary reason why He's developing songs, primary reason why He is having the choir, the national choir, the temple choir, or whoever He's leading, is to give thanks to the Lord because His mercy endureth forever. So He doesn't send His wrath down upon us, and we're glad for it, and we're covered, we're safe, we're protected from the Lord. And so we're going to pray and give thanks to the Lord in our songs. And so we notice that, of course, in dedicating His role, His office, or so forth in the temple, was so that there was a purpose to the songs. Today we have no real purpose to songs. They're just kind of like, He lifts me up on angel wings, hallelujah, or whatever. Some just kind of weird little fun thing that people want to sing, and then sing it 7 times over, and for no real purpose other than to rile the crowd and to get the spirit flowing or going or whatever they want to say. But there's a purpose to actual Bible songs. There's a purpose to actual singing, and that is to give thanks to the Lord because He's merciful to us. He gave us mercy. There's things that He's done for us. And so our songs need to have that theme and ground in Him regardless of however we sing. And then going on to chapter 25, verses 1 through 3, we also give, in the same book, in 1 Chronicles chapter 25, 1 through 3, we receive a similar thing. It says, "Moreover, David and the captains of the host separated to the service of the sons of Asaph." See, Asaph is the main guy, and of Herman and of Jethron. So these 3 guys are the main guys who are in charge of singing and given that position by David. Separated, see, they're sanctified people. They're just not, I can sing good, so I can have the service, but I'm not saved. I can sing good, but I'm not set apart. You're dedicated. This is their full-time job. This is what they are set apart to do. So that shows that when you have this service, it is something that you need to take seriously. It needs to be set apart from things that are common, and it needs to be set apart to the Lord's use. So the second thing, obviously, my side sermon for singing and stuff is basically, first of all, it needs to be thankfulness to the Lord because of His mercy, and the second point would be that the songs that you sing cannot be just common songs that you sing, like secular songs or whatever. They cannot just be tweaked for Jesus. They can't just be unclean songs that are tweaked for Jesus, but these are special songs that are set apart for Jesus, set apart for the Lord, set apart for God's use. And so they took this so seriously that they had people set apart just to make songs for this specific genre of singing. Not just some guy who makes a song here for Disney, and then another guy who makes and then the next day he makes a song for this or that. No, their whole life was set apart just to make songs for thankfulness to the Lord. And so that's kind of a serious issue, is that not only are your pastors set apart, you need to have your song leaders set apart and stuff like that. Obviously there's not qualifications for your song leader, but they still need to be set apart Christians. You can't just have some carnal Christian who drinks on Saturday and sings on Sunday in your service. They have to be disciples of Christ. But here we have the main 3 who should prophesy. See, they're also preaching through their songs. Your songs aren't just for a fun little thing. Your songs are for prophecy, for preaching. And especially, these people were set apart because when you're set apart, focused entirely on the Word of God. The preacher, you often hear him preaching and teaching and stuff. The song leaders were supposed to do the same thing, but with song. It's just a different style of preaching. And so it starts out with the songs because that speaks to your spirit and your soul, and they call it soul. When the jazz guys playing their music or whatever, they call it soul music or whatever, or the blues speak to your soul, in certain ways. It's the same way with singing. You think that's funny, huh? Anyway, but it's the same way with singing. Spiritual songs is that it speaks to your soul and your spirit, and it gets you prepared to actually hear the direct preaching. It's another form of preaching. And so your song service needs to have a reason, a purpose. It needs to prophesy. And he says with harps, with upholsteries, with cymbals, and the number of the workmen according to their service. And so, now obviously, the cymbals there. Oh, drums and cymbals, how dare you? But that is entirely, now obviously there's a right way, drums and cymbals are that's, especially in independent Baptist circles, it's like, that's the picture of liberalism. That's the picture of how dare you, drums on the stadium or whatever, or whatever that is called. Stage. We don't have a stage, behind the pulpit. There we go. Behind the pulpit is wrong. Well, do we say that because we think the actual instruments are evil and perverted? No, it's because that today, in the style of worldly music that we have today, it is their primary focus is on drums and cymbals and stuff like that. And so, if that is the common unclean way to play music today, and we need to have our music set apart, then why are we going to try to look like common things? Why are we trying to look like that? We need to have our music set apart, so we're going to do it with things that are traditional, things that are wholesome, things that have, in general, are associated with biblical ways of playing. And so our songs are going to sound like separated songs. They're not going to sound like the world songs. They're not going to sound like common show tunes. And so we as independent Baptists make the decision, majority of our churches make the decision not to have cymbals and drums for that reason. Not because they're not necessarily unbiblical, but because the people that have learned how to play those play them in a certain way that are sensual and not quite honoring the Lord. And so I can preach a lot more on that, but that's not the purpose of our sermon tonight. This is kind of just a little introduction, trying to show you who Jed Thuron is here. And so he's set apart. He's to prophesy, and then he's to use in the tools of prophesying in music. He's to use musical instruments, and he's also to use and direct the choir and so forth. Number of workmen. See, and with the cymbals and the number of workmen. The workmen are the people that are in the choir. It's a work. This is something that you're set apart to. It's a ministry. Just being part of a choir doesn't mean that you show up on Sunday. It's actually your work. You need to put some effort into it. And so, of the sons of Asaph, see, it's his sons of Asaph, and Zichor, Joseph, and Nephi, and Ashereth, and the sons of Asaph, under the hands of Asaph, which prophesied according to the order of the king. So he's being given an order by the king to do this, and not only are they singing in this manner, they set their own children apart to sing in this manner. So just to think about that, so we get this direction. In the New Testament, we have the ordinances for the pastor and for the deacons and the deacons' wives. And here in the Old Testament, we're kind of getting the general idea of how even the song leaders need to have their children in order in helping in their service, in their work. So that's a good picture of how that you should raise your children up. Today in the secular world is kind of like, well, I just kind of want to raise them in such a neutral way that they kind of sort of wonder, oh, one day I want to be an astronaut, another day I want to be a police officer, another day I want to be a fire truck or a barber. Whoever dreams about being a barber, but anyway. A barber, I can live there. Some ladies, with their little whatever stylings and stuff do, but it's, eventually people kind of, but we kind of get this idea that we're supposed to raise our children in such a neutral way that they'll kind of be drawn kind of mysteriously to something that they're called to. But if you do this neutral, open-minded drawn to, then you better beware of what's drawing your children. And so the Bible here talks about how that these song leaders, their children were in the same work as them. They taught their children how to do this. And so you need to draw your children to the Lord. That is kind of the general idea there. in these songs. So do your songs draw your children to the Lord? Or do your song into His work, into your work in serving the Lord? Or do your songs kind of draw people like a gateway drug to the world?
Good.
Yeah, so your singing in church sounds just like the world songs.
Uh-oh.
And so while you're in church on Sunday, you're singing to the Lord, and then you're on the bar on Monday night singing to the whores. But anyway, and so we see the difference there is that learning to use your singing set apart for the Lord should not draw you into the world. So oftentimes you have these Christian, how many people have started out as Christian singers? They move to gospel, Southern gospel, from the regular Christian singing to Southern gospel to country, and then from country with kind of going on my beer and my truck and my church on Sunday, yeah, it's a good day or whatever, and they have this, they transition through this to eventually the pop and the secular and the rap and the gangster and all this stuff because they want to reach a larger audience. Not for the Lord, but for their career and for money. And so that's why all the country singers and all the gospel singers, like Elvis was a gospel singer. That's how he learned. He learned in the southern churches. He was a Baptist growing up as a kid, learned how to sing, and then he transitioned from his singing to that's why a lot of his concerts he would sing what are those things called, black gospel songs or whatever, soul songs and stuff, like an Amazing Grace and all these things. He would end his songs with that while he was in a drunken stupor. He'd be like, Amazing Grace, and like to the Lord, trying to be a testimony to the Lord after he just finished wagging his hips and doing all the stuff in a drunken stupor. And then he wanted to kind of, and so you can see how conformity to the world in your singing can kind of not bring you to the Lord, but bring you to the world, and then he dies in a drug-induced overdose on an airplane or something like that. But anyway, enough of that ranting. Of Jethron, and then verse 3 here, it says of Jethron, the sons of Jethron, Giddith, Zerai, Jeshaniah, Heshboniah, and Mattaniah, 6 under the hands of their father, Jethron, who prophesied with a harp to give thanks to praise of the Lord. So his kids themselves prophesied with harps. David prophesied with harps, and so forth. And so we see how that these 6 kids who their father Jethron, who prophesied with harp to give thanks to and praise to the Lord. So that was the purpose: give thanks and praise to the Lord. And then it goes down there and lists a bunch more stuff, and we don't have time to go through all that. So we get this idea that he really wants to be set apart to the Lord. He wants to do what is right for the Lord. And in this passage, when we go back to Psalms chapter 39, is David instructing Jethron to set himself apart, not just himself, but his singing and his counsel and his words, not to speak to the wicked. Don't use your words and your wisdom for the wicked. Even the songs that you speak are not to draw the wicked or to make the wicked smarter or make the wicked anything more than they are, because your words are set apart for the holy people, the God's people. And your singing and your songs is not to influence wicked people. Your songs are to influence righteous people. And so oftentimes the big mistake that Christians get into is thinking, well, in our singing, we want to develop them for the seeker-friendly people. We want to develop them in such a way that it'll draw the lost world. So we need their tunes, we need their things, we need everything that comes with the trappings of the world, so that we can take the world stuff and draw them in. Now, when I was in Taiwan as a kid, we went to this, we were homeschooled, but we did some activities in Cub Scouts with an American academy, an English academy there that everybody spoke English. The foreigners would go there. All the American politicians or unofficial ambassadors because they didn't have real ambassadors. And, but anyway, so everybody who was a foreigner or what was a rich Chinese person or Taiwanese person, they would send their kids there so that they could learn English and have more of an international thing. But it was more of a, Morrison Academy was started as a Christian academy, and then eventually kind of became this very generic, liberal, but still Christian and wholesome for the most part academy, and they were a wholesome college, and not a college, but an academy, high school, and lower classes and stuff from kindergarten all the way up to high school, and so. They had this concert there. It was supposed to be like for Christian songs and things like this, and for the deaf people. And then their theme was winning back the Lord's music from the world. And so basically, that was quite literally what it was: winning back the Lord's music from the world. And then basically, they had loud. Bass, their whatever, it's like, and their cymbals and their music and stuff, and their idea, their excuse was, oh well, you know, see, this is for the deaf, and we're kind of, and for everybody else who hears it too. So the deaf can't hear, so they need vibrations and all this stuff, and they can feel the vibrations and things like that, and so they had like a deaf choir, you know, doing their sign language or whatever, and with the rest of the music all rocked out or whatever, and loud and very worldly, but they were singing songs to the Lord and all this stuff, and after I think 5-10 minutes, our family went because we were like, hey, you know, we want to support whatever is going on, and it's an activity, especially you want to have all these activities to go to as kids, and so we went. And then after 10 minutes, we were like, we're leaving. Sorry, can't stay here. So it was that bad because they had took the common world's music and tried to sprinkle Jesus in there and only defiled the holy in doing it. And so you need to be careful when you take the unclean to defile the holy with it. You know, so it needs to be sanctified. It needs to be holy. In order to communicate holy things. And so here in this passage, he says, I said, I will take heed to my ways. I sin not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle while the wicked is before me. So you're not going, you better not sin with your tongue, and you better not be communicating with the wicked. Now, obviously, as Christians, we communicate with the wicked all the time. No, and now I need to also point out there's a difference between, in general, now obviously everybody's wicked, you know, everybody's fallen away, and we understand that as lost people, every lost person is wicked in the sense that they've all gone away, their mouth is an open sepulcher, and all these things that Romans talks about the wicked people. But in general, the wicked are people that are not just like neutral. You know, back then you were either holy or you were wicked. Either because this is a holy nation that they're in, so the people they deal with are either going to be conforming to and seeking the Lord, and actually because they were not distant from the Lord, they had the gospel, they had look to your Redeemer, God will save you, and so forth, and you're in God's holy nation, you need to be holy as a people, you're priests set apart. So they have this influence. It's not like today's culture where it's all secular and neutral, and this mysteriously guiding of forces will mysteriously guide you to the good, but rather in this culture, so you typically were either righteous or you were wicked in rebellion against the culture. You know, countercultural and stuff. There is no. I'm sure there was kind of this neutral type of thing going on, but in general there was less of it. Today there's more of this neutral type of culture going on because, and that's kind of like the world or whatever. But in general, the wicked are people that are absolutely haters of God. They don't like what's going on, and they don't want to be part of it. But in general today, you have a lot of neutral people in which, you know, if you go to work, you can't just say to the guy you're training, for a position or whoever's training you is like, hey, you're a lost man. I'm not going to speak to you. I'm not going to open my mouth to you. I'm not going to say anything to you. But we obviously understand, and Paul explains that if the lost world, how we're to be salt and light and all this stuff. So we understand that we're supposed to preach the gospel. We understand that we communicate and even for work, train and talk to and have conversations with co-workers and different things like that. But this is talking more about those who are in opposition to the Lord, and especially as somebody who's set apart. Jethro is set apart for a work, and so in order to be holy, he cannot use his ministry to communicate even good things to the wicked, who are not just unclean, but are defilers, or haters of God. So the wicked is somebody who's active. Now, obviously, the wicked are people that are active in rebelling against God, not just neutral in just being a lost person. Now, obviously, the lost person is wicked in general sense, but in a specific sense, the wicked. So I will keep my mouth with a bridle while the wicked is before me. I'm not going to be using my mouth, because it's holy, to help the wicked in that sense, in general sense. I was dumb with silence. I held my peace, even from good, and my sorrow was stirred. Now, obviously, as a Christian, you're going to have a desire to communicate with all people. You're going to have a desire. Now, I'll get into this thing. You're like, wait a minute, Pastor, are you saying that we're not supposed to even talk to the lost world? Or what about salvation? What about communicating the gospel? Yes, we communicate the Lord's wisdom to them, but I'll get into that in the further into the message, but just kind of help you understand that we're talking right now specifically about not about salvation, but rather about educating and helping the lost world in their lost state. Okay, there's an important thing to understand, that we as Christians need to understand the purpose and the goal of communicating with the lost world. Is primary focus is to save them, to get them saved, to have their life changed, to understand that, to help them understand their life, their goals in life, to understand the end of their times. And so this is what he's talking about here. And Paul will talk about this too, and we'll look in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 in a little bit to explain how exactly do we communicate with lost people. How exactly do we communicate with the wicked. But for now, this passage, as we study it, is about understanding who Jethro is. Compared to the wicked person. In the Bible, you are not to allow wicked and holy to mix together, to be one. And so this is why it's important that a guy set apart holy to the holy praising of the Lord, and he cannot be mixing with common and unclean things in his social life. He has a specific job to do, a specific duty to do. And David himself is saying, as a person who's set apart for the Lord, as somebody who you are now set apart for, Jethro, this is how you have to be before the wicked, because you are not allowed to use God's holy things for the wicked's purposes. Because the wicked, if you give the wicked wisdom, then they will use your wisdom wickedly, right? And so that's what he's talking about. He's not saying don't help them understand the end of their ways, but rather, if you instruct this guy, if you teach a wicked person how to sing, will he sing holy unto the Lord, or will he sing wickedly to the world? And no, he'll use it for his own ends. And so that's what he's communicating to Jethro here, is that you don't use your talents to instruct and teach the wicked, even if it's for good. Even if you're like, oh yeah, in society we're going to teach people how to sing so that they can have Disney World songs or whatever, And well, that's a whole another topic about supposed good Disney World songs that are secular. They're not secular, they're deceptive. But anyway, yeah. So I don't want to go too much into that. Make your own decision about Disney World and Disney music. So I was dumb with silence. I held my peace, even from good. And my sorrow was stirred. Man, I really want to help these people. I really want to communicate these people. That's his heart. He wants to help even the wicked people. And his heart is stirred Lord, make me know and then he says, my heart was hot within me. I'm seeing the way they're going, and I'm like, I have the talent, I have the ability, I have the desire to help these people to live a better, wholesome life. And I know that I'm not supposed to communicate with them, but I'm burning within me. Now, he has a desire to give them the message, to give them a message and help and to give them wisdom for their life. I was musing, the fire burned, then spake I with my tongue, not to the wicked, but to the Lord. Remember, he set apart to the Lord, so he needs to communicate to the Lord. And so this is a good and intelligent thing for us to do, is that when we have a problem, or we have a desire to do something that we have an ability to do, serve the wicked, we need to, and we have this desire to do it, and to do things secularly when we know we're supposed to be doing things in a holy way, set apart to the Lord, is that we need to communicate to God and show him our feelings and explain what we're desiring here. Lord, make me to know mine end and the measure of my days, what it is, that I may know how frail I am. And so he's wanting to help these wicked people in a general sense to better themselves and to do good and whatnot. And he's burning within them to do that, but he knows he's set apart for the Lord. And then he says, hey, I need to remember, I need to keep my focus on the end facts here. The fact remains is that I as a human being am frail. They as a human being are frail. They're only going to be temporary. They're not going to be here eternally. And it says, Lord, make me to know my end. Help me to have my proper perspective in understanding that just as a human, they are frail, and as a human, I am frail. And the measure of my days, what it is that I may know how frail I am. I need to keep that in my mind. Understand that you are frail. You're not going to have, your life here on earth is not going to be eternal in this period of time. Now, obviously, when Christ returns and we have a renewed body, then there will be a millennium and so forth. We're going to be eternal. We're going to have a role in that kingdom. But as far as our period of time that God has set aside for us today in our generation, it's not going to be very long. It's going to be a handbreadth. It's going to be very short. And so you need to understand that when you're communicating with the lost world, time is short. It's not very long. You don't need to be wasting your time trying to better the lives of lost people for the fact that they don't need to be bettered, they need to be saved. And so he says, Behold, thou hast made my days as a handbreadth, and mine age as nothing before thee. Verily, every man at his best state. So here I am bettering the lost world. They're at their best state, in their most glorious state ever. They're still going to fall short of the glory of God. You know, every man at his best state is altogether vanity. It's pointless to better a lost person if he just dies and goes to hell and never exists ever again. You know, that's a pointless thing to do. But so oftentimes, how many people start out as Christians, singing Christian songs, as saying, oh, I'm set apart for the Lord's work, and then they end up turning their ministry fully dedicated to secular world, secular work, secular nature, secular things in the fact that, oh, now I'm singing pop songs, now I'm making money, now I'm doing all these things with something that God gave to me, and I'm bettering the lives of people that won't exist for more than a few years. And David wants Jethro to think about this. He says, Selah. Says, at his best state is altogether vanity. So why are you going to be communicating and encouraging and using your talents for the wicked to better them when they're not going to be here? You see, this is the problem, the flawed logic we have. We need to consider our own days. Understand that we only have a short amount of time. Who are we going to invest in? What are we going to do? And so this is what he needs to understand about being set apart, being holy. The reason why we as Christians need to learn not just to be clean. You know, as we go through Leviticus, we're going to understand that there are unclean things, there are clean things, and then there are common things, and then there are holy things. And so a lot of people say, well, I'm clean. You know, that's their denial, that I'm clean. But God doesn't want just clean people. He wants holy people. Now, being clean will keep you out of hell, but it will not make you holy. Sanctification makes you holy. So in this, he's saying, if you are over here, set apart for the Lord's use in the holiness, you cannot be using that to save, to better the lost world. You need to use that to make the common things holy, and to make them sanctified to the Lord. You need to understand your audience. The purpose of why you're set apart is not to cleanse the unclean, because that is the work of the Holy Ghost. In our communicating with the lost world, our job is to communicate to them salvation and for them to come to the Lord. When they are cleansed and God has made them clean, then we need to help sanctify them in our set apartness. But here in this passage, he says, think about this, understand how in their best state they are altogether vanity. Vanity is nothing. There's nothing there. It is non-existent. It's almost as if they never existed. And so all your hard work and putting into that, whether it's for making money or whether it's for bettering the society or whether it's for whatever it is, it's a waste of time because it's all burnt up. It's wood, hay, and stubble. He says, surely every man walketh in a vain show. They're walking in a vain show. Even the greatest man in his best state without the Lord is walking in a vain show. You think, you see this guy and you're like, oh wow, look at the great reputation he has. Look at the greatness he has, and look how people respect him. If I could just get in with this guy, then my life would be made. Everything in working with that man would make me successful. And you guys say, wait a second. This success is only going to be temporary if it's for the physical needs of my life. I can't be focusing on just, now obviously, Abraham and people, they did have riches and wealth and stuff, but they used it for a certain purpose. It's not wrong in gathering wealth, but the perspective of why you gather it needs to be made. You need to be aware of it, that you need to gather these things to be set apart for the Lord. And knoweth not who shall, verse 6, surely every man walketh in a vain show, surely they are disquieted in vain. They're always upset. They're always worried about something. So verse 6 is about the typical person. They walk in a vain show. Whatever reputation they have is not worth anything. It's going to go away very quickly. They spend years building up their show, their reputation, their outward appearance, and they can lose it within seconds after many years of building up. And even when they die, if they're not saved, there is no purpose to it. Surely they are disquieted in vain. I mean, they're doing all this work, they're trying to do all this effort, and all the effort you put into them is vain. You upset yourself about lost people, about how, oh, look at all these lost people out here. If only somebody would teach them, have them more education, have them help all these educations, and if only they could get off drugs, if only they could get all these things. And we're talking about temporal things that we say, if only our streets could be cleaned up, if only these things. No, the thing is that we're all upset about vain things. People on drugs is not the problem. People all speaking bad words at work is not the problem. People all treating you out of $1 or $2 in society is not the problem. Or breaking into your house is not the problem. All these things being upset about are vain. They won't last. He heapeth up riches, and knoweth not who shall gather them. Says, and now, Lord, what wait I for? My hope is in thee. He's remembering his focus, his purpose. And so this is what he is telling Jethro, is that, hey, what are you waiting for? My hope is in thee. And he says, deliver me from all my transgressions, make me not the reproach of the foolish. And so what you need to understand, when somebody is set apart for the Lord and they cast their pearls before swine, if you will, and wasting all their effort there, then what will happen is that they will become the reproach of the foolish. The foolish or the wicked are those people that do the vain show. They're disquieted about vain things. They're heaping up riches, And then when you try to better their life in a more wholesome spiritual way, without giving them salvation, without them receiving the Lord, then anything that you do that may not be holy, or may be common, or is a transgression, a violation, then they're going to bring up. They're going to say, hey, you're trying to make me look like this good, great person, but look how bad you live. You know, how oftentimes does the lost world bring up the issues and the transgressions of Christians and of people that are saved and people that are trying to live for God, but then they fall in some way. Then the lost world foolishly says, you're trying to make me look, and you've been trying to help them, and all they do is turn around and rend you again and say, hey, look at all this stuff that you're doing yourself, and you're not separated. Why should I be separated? And so he says, deliver me from all my transgressions, make me not the reproach of the foolish. Make me look, even in their eyes, Lord, help me to be sanctified. Help me to live holy. Help me, any transgressions that I have, deliver me from them. He's trying to understand his purpose here. Don't let me get drugged down in the temptation to focus on bettering the lost world without Christ. He says, I was dumb, I opened not my mouth, and why did I end up being able to do where he says, I will take heed to my ways, that I sin not with my tongue, I will keep my mouth with a bridle, while the wicked is before me. How am I able to have my focus correct? He says, the way I was able to do that is because thou didst it. You know, we as human beings communicate on a natural level. We, even as Christians, as we live in this corrupt body of ours, have a tendency to try to better our fellow human beings. I mean, it's just natural. Here he says, I was done with silence, I held my peace, even from good, and my sorrow was stirred, my heart was hot within me. I wanted to help them, I wanted to do what was good for them, but I know because I'm set apart, I need to be using my talents for the Lord and not for the lost. And he says, the only way I was able to do that was because I had my focus on you. I remember I thought that you would help me remain holy, and my hope was in you, and because my hope was in you, and I'm constantly asking you to help me to remain holy and not appear foolish before the lost world, I was dumb because thou didst it. You helped me. Because when we have to remain holy to the Lord, it's going to be natural for us to want to communicate with our fellow man, even in their lost state, to better their not to salvation, but their natural state, to just make them better. That social justice 101 is make the natural state of man better. And so, and he says, remove, because thou didst it. Remove thy stroke away from me, I am consumed by the blow of thine hand. It's like, when thou with rebukes doth correct man for iniquity. So he's saying here is that he's telling him, he says, now that I have my focus right, you don't have to hold me down and prevent me like with the stroke. When somebody has a stroke, they can't speak, right? You know, so he's talking about the stroke here. Because thou didst it, you helped me to remain silent in this way. He says, remove thy stroke away from me. I am consumed by the blow of thine hand. He's deaf and dumb, and he's burning within himself. He's like, hey, I'm done. I'm ready to submit. I'm ready to do this. The Lord helped him, and now he's through the stroke of his hand. Now I'm ready to do it. He says, thou makest when verse 11. He says, when with rebukes thou dost correct man for iniquity. So oftentimes, when we see our fellow man in their lost state being rebuked, our natural tendency is to do what? Oh, comfort them and to help them and to do all these things. But God, because he set us apart to be holy, prevented him from comforting the lost in their rebukes. The reason why is because God is rebuking these people for their lost state and wants them to come back to the Lord, wants them to come back to him. So God wants the lost world not to be bettered, but to be saved. He says, remove thy stroke away from me, because I understand now. I understand my state, and so now I'm not going to try to better them in that way. when thou with rebukes dost correct man for iniquity, for his injustice, for his wrong, thou makest his beauty consume even away like a moth. So when we see somebody is hurt because of their sinful state, we kind of want to relieve them of that, but we need to understand their rebuke for their iniquities is from God, and we need to let that take its course so that it can lead the lost person back to God. Because if we kind of relieve that pressure from God physically, then all we're doing is causing the lost man to be better in his natural state temporarily and then go to hell. So we need to let that natural rebuke from God take its full course for their betterment, even if it makes their beauty to consume away. And it's a hard thing to do because our natural desire in burning within us is to better them. When thou with rebukes dost correct man for iniquity, thou makest his beauty consume away like a moth. Surely every man is vanity. So in their natural state, we can't better them. We would be no help to them in opening our mouth and defiling our own selves before them, because all that happens when a holy thing touches an unclean thing, shall that thing be holy still? And the Bible says no. And so we need to understand that it needs to be set apart. It cannot be common to the wicked, to that. He says, and so he says, you need to think about this. Think again, surely every man is vanity. You can't just better somebody and expect there to be a lasting result. You just can't do that. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear unto my cry. Hold not thy peace at my tears, for I am a stranger with thee and a sojourner, as all my fathers were. So he understands his perspective. He understands that he wants to help them, and it's burning within him. And then he wants the Lord to hear his prayer, understand his heart, that yes, I care about the lost world. I do care about them. But I need to let you have your full course in that. And I need to understand that I'm a sojourner in this lost world with you. And so I need to let you take the lead. And so when we are, as Christians, we need to let the Lord take the lead in rebuking the lost world and doing his thing with the lost so they can come back to the Lord and be saved. And then we can communicate, and the holy can communicate with songs and stuff for the saved people. So the song leader of the church is not to communicate in song and in prophecy and stuff for the lost world for salvation, to somehow save them through his ministry, but rather his ministry is set apart as a holy ministry to the Lord, to sing praises unto the Lord and to lead the congregation in that, even though his desire is for the lost world. I'm a stranger with thee. They're not my fellow man. They're lost, and I need to let the Lord take the lead. A sojourner with all my fathers were. So all his fathers, everybody in this nation, are set apart to be holy unto the Lord, and we need to allow God to rebuke the wicked for their iniquities and allow him to turn their hearts back to him properly without interfering in that process. He says, "Oh, spare me that I may recover strength before I go hence and be no more." And so this last verse is about is asking God to not put a stroke on me. You know, he forced me to be silent when I was trying to do this. Now that I have my focus right, now that you have your focus right, Jethron, you can ask the Lord to remove the stroke. You can ask the Lord to do that. But if you try to better your man, and you in your holy state, just remember that God's going to put a stroke on you. The foolish are going to rend you. They're going to reproach you, and your transgressions are going to come up before your face. But when you have your focus right, understand that you're set apart to be holy, and your music is supposed to be holy. You can call on the Lord to spare you, so that you can recover strength from this desire to better your man, and that I may go and recover strength before I go hence and be no more. Understanding that I'm going to go the same. At this time, he says, and be no more, talking about how that his physical body is eventually going to die. It's only hand breath as well. And so that he needs to have strength to do his job, his purpose, his focus, and so forth. And the understanding that in this perspective, we need to understand that our job with the lost people is not to better them, but to be witnesses of Christ so that He can save them. A good understanding of this would be 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. And Paul is saying, hey, when I came to you guys, when I first met you, he says, verse 1, but when I determined this with myself, that I would not come again to you in heaviness, for if I make you sorry, who is he then that maketh me glad, but the same which is made sorry? And I wrote you the same unto you, lest when I came I should have sorrow from them, which I ought to be rejoicing, having confidence in you all, that my joy of you all, for I'm not sure if this is right chapter. I don't think it is. But let's try 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Yep, there we go. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. There we go. That's the right one. And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech, nor of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you, save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. So you see, when he came to these people, when they first met, his purpose was not to come to them in wisdom and excellency of speech and all these tricky ways of compelling you to do good and be with God. For I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. To communicate to you salvation. That was my job. The lost world, to communicate to them salvation, Jesus Christ and Him crucified, and I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, because I wanted to consider what I was saying to you. I didn't want to just better you; I wanted to save you. And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom. If you do this, then God's going to prosper you. If you do this, then God's going to give you money in your bank account. If you do this, prosperity preaching is what he's talking about here, bettering your mankind, social justice. If you do this, you will have peace with your master. And if you do this, and so you see how oftentimes a man's wisdom teaches man how to be wise. But Paul was like, no, I was afraid to speak anything other than Jesus Christ and Him crucified, because I didn't want to make you in man's wisdom uplifted and then die and go to hell. I didn't want to just come with a social gospel for you. I didn't just want to come to better your life. I came to save you. And so this is the purpose of communicating with the lost. My speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit of power. When I demonstrate the Spirit with preaching the gospel, the Spirit is communicated to the lost person, and that gives them the ability to hear the gospel and be saved. Demonstrating in that your faith, of the Spirit and of power, the power of the Spirit here, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men. I'm bettered, and I seek the Lord because I'm wise in men's knowledge. So oftentimes churches are centered around this and bettering the character of man, yet they are lost as any other man in the world. A lot of social justice churches are this way. They better the state of man, but in their lost state. He says that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men. What's our faith supposed to be? In the power of God. Faith is supposed to be in Christ. Faith is supposed to be in salvation, not in the wisdom of men. You need to repent of the wisdom of men. You need to repent of your own dead works. You need to repent of all those things, because with all those things, you're just going to be lost and going to hell. And so he says it's only by the faith in Jesus Christ, the saving gospel of Jesus Christ, that you can in any way be saved from that. He says, howbeit we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, that are already saved. See, this is the important thing to understand, is that the lost world does not receive the wisdom of God, but it does receive the gospel, and is preached in the power of the Spirit. But we speak of the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. Unto whose glory? Those that are perfect, those that are saved. Which none of the princes of this world knew. For had they known it, because the princes of this world are the ones who develop man's wisdom, which none of the princes of this world, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, I have not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. So the heart of man there is the lost man, natural man. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. So if I'm preaching them man's wisdom, bettering mankind, but not coming in humbleness and power of the Spirit, preaching only the gospel of Christ to these men, then they're never going to get the revelation of the Spirit. They're never going to get the wisdom of God. They're never going to get saved. They're never going to be verified here. But verse 10, but God hath revealed them unto us by what? His Spirit. So if you don't have the Spirit, you don't have the mysteries of God. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. For what man knoweth the things of man, save the spirit of man which is in him. If you preach man's wisdom, you're just going to better the man's spirit, but it's still going to be dead in trespasses of sin, because it doesn't have the Spirit of Christ. Even so, the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things which are freely given to us of God. So we need to understand that within us burns the desire of a man's spirit to communicate with their lost man. But we need to understand that we as Christians are set apart to the Lord. We are not just man's spirit, but our spirit has been freed to God's wisdom, and our desire, of course, is to teach wisdom to others. But we need to understand that the lost man cannot receive the things of God, and therefore, whenever you try to communicate them to him, he's going to consider those things foolishness. And so we need to understand what we need to teach them versus what we need to empower them to do. For what man knoweth the things of God, save the spirit of man which is in him, even so the things of God knoweth no man but the Spirit of God. Now we have received not that spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things which are freely given to us of God. So when we try to communicate to the lost world things that are freely given to us by God through His Spirit, they're not going to understand them. It's not going to help them. Any betterment that they receive is going to be temporary and vain. Which things also we speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Ghost teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Their spirit is dead in trespasses of sin. Now, it's still keeping them alive, and it still searches them, and they have the Spirit within them that can do, but it's bound to sin, and it's dead to sin, dead from God, cannot communicate to God. And so they're spiritually discerned. That discernment, that wisdom you give to them will only be bettering their lost state. But he that is spiritual judgeth all things, yet he himself is judged of no man. So if I'm doing things spiritually, then any transgressions or anything like that God has already dealt with me in through His Spirit cannot be judged by the lost world, because I'm not communicating with them the wisdom of God's things. That's when somebody tries to communicate to the lost world, oh, you need to be good, you need to keep the Ten Commandments, and they're going to be like, you don't keep the Ten Commandments, so why should I keep the Ten Commandments? There's no point there. And so when we communicate the things of wisdom, which the Ten Commandments are to show sin and show that they are not holy, and show that we don't keep them ourselves, but only through the Holy Spirit that can teach us the principles behind them. But he that is spiritual judgeth all things, yet he himself is judged of no man. For who hath known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. So we, on this earth, being sojourners with the mind of Christ, being sojourners with Christ, the Spirit of Christ, here on this earth, what do we need to do according to the Psalm? We need to understand that we need to be able to communicate not God's wisdom to them, nor man's wisdom to them, but we need to communicate Christ and Him crucified through the power of the Spirit. So if we are letting the Lord take the lead in communicating with the wicked, then we ourselves, in our spirit, are going to be silent. We're going to be dumb before them. We're not going to speak man's wisdom. We're not going to speak from our spirit that burns within us. We're going to say, Lord, my heart is burning on what to say to these people, but I'm going to let you take the lead. I'm going to communicate as Paul did. I determined not to know anything among that lost world save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear. He's not saying that he was like, oh, I don't want to talk to you about anything else. No, he was saying here, I was with you in weakness and fear. He took the backstage to the gospel. My speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but so notice this. In the Spirit, he had demonstration of the Spirit and of power. He had power there, but he himself, his spirit, was humble. It was behind the power of the Lord. So when people preach and filled with the Spirit, like Paul and Peter and all those people, when they were filled with the Spirit and they proclaimed the gospel, they themselves were in weakness and in fear. Now, how oftentimes when you proclaim the gospel before the lost world, you are in weakness and fear. That's your spirit. Is inwardly you are weak and fearful of what might happen to you, but outwardly you're saying, I'm letting the Lord take the lead on this one. I don't know what to do. In that hour, He'll let me know what to speak, and then I'm going to speak the words of the Spirit, and they're going to proclaim Jesus and Him crucified. I'm not going to be arguing and debating with a lost man about words of wisdom or the words of God, but rather I'm going to be humble, I'm going to be quiet, in my own spirit, I'm going to have much trembling and not even say good, because I don't want to speak before the lost. I want the Lord to speak before the lost. You notice that difference there is that in Jethron, his job is not to speak through his own spirit to the lost, but allow the proclamation of God's Spirit to save the lost. And so that's the way it is with us as Christians as well, is that we need to let God take the lead, the Spirit of Christ in us take the lead. Let us step back and be humble and even tremble, and yet let the Lord have demonstration through us in spirit and in power. So how are you in your ministry as set apart to the Lord? How are you trying to take the lead? Are you trying to burn within you to teach man's wisdom to the lost world? Or are you going to say, I'm going to step back and let God demonstrate and do His rebukes for their iniquity and preach gospel to them so that in power they can come to the Lord? The decision's ours. And the Lord's allowed us to have that. If you can't step back, then let God's stroke be upon you. And if you're ready to be used of the Lord, let Him proclaim the gospel, because you're sojourner with the Spirit of Christ which is within you. Let's pray. Dear Holy Father, thank you, blessed you give to us, Lord. I pray that you'll help us to understand this important principle that we are set apart for you, for your work. And Lord, I pray that we will have the proper perspective as it comes to the lost world, to communicate spiritual things with spiritual people, but for the lost world, in order to save them, that our focus, our purpose, our communication is not just to better them, their spirit, but rather to save their spirit, and so that it can be free to follow after you. Lord, I pray that you'll help us have this proper perspective, understanding that we only have a short amount of time, not to waste it on temporal things with the lost world, but on demonstrating your Spirit and power before them. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.